Good morning. I'm Michael Cooper, Member of Parliament for St. Albert, Edmonton, and the official opposition Deputy Shadow Minister for Finance. I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleagues, MP Pierre Poilievre, Shadow Minister for Finance, and MP Michael Barrett, Shadow Minister for Ethics. I was there at Finance Committee yesterday when Bill Morneau appeared, and I have to say that what came out of yesterday's committee is shocking. We knew going in to yesterday that the finance minister broke the law when he announced a $3 million grant to We, an organization that employed his daughter. And just by coincidence, that grant was announced the very month she was hired by the We organization. We knew that the finance minister broke the law when he failed to recuse himself and indeed participated in the decision to award the We organization a nearly $1 billion agreement. But after yesterday, it gets a whole lot worse. We learned yesterday that the finance minister and his family benefited from and accepted more than $41,000 in travel-related expenses by the We organization to exotic destinations, including Kenya and Ecuador. And guess what? Just by coincidence, on the very day that the finance minister was to appear before our committee, he suddenly discovered that there were these $41,000 in expenses, and just by coincidence, he paid it back yesterday, the very day that he was appearing before our committee. The seriousness of what the finance minister admitted to yesterday should not be understated. The finance minister broke the law. And let me, in that regard, draw your attention to several sections of the Conflict of Interest Act. Section 11 of the Conflict of Interest Act states that, and I'm quoting, "No public office holder or member of his or her family shall accept any gift or other advantage that might reasonably be seen to have been given to influence the public office holder." Bill Morneau did that when he accepted $41,000 in free travel by the We organization, an organization that he handed out millions of dollars in grants to, and nearly a $1 billion agreement. Section 12 of the Conflict of Interest Act states, "No minister of the Crown, no member of his or her family shall accept travel on non-commercial chartered or private aircraft for any purpose." Now, we don't know if Bill Morneau or his family, when they went to Ecuador or Kenya, traveled by way of private aircraft. But what we do know is that the $41,000 in unpaid hidden expenses were relating to so-called programming costs, and we know that most of We's programs are in rural and remote areas. And so therefore, it begs the question whether or not the finance minister and his family contravened Section 12 of the Conflict of Interest Act. Now, even if somehow traveling on the dime of We in the amount of $41,000 somehow passes muster, there's another section of the Conflict of Interest Act that's problematic from the standpoint of Bill Morneau, and that is Section 23 of the Conflict of Interest Act. And that section states, quote, if the total value of all gifts or other advantages accepted exceeds $200 from any one source, the reporting public officeholder shall disclose the gifts or other advantages to the Ethics Commissioner within 30 days after the day on which the value exceeds $200. There is absolutely no record that Bill Morneau disclosed those $41,000 in expenses. Indeed, he admitted that he did not disclose them because he claims he only discovered them just in the last few days and paid the money back just yesterday. And so what we have here is a finance minister who is a repeat offender under the Conflict of Interest Act. This is the same finance minister who was found to have breached the Conflict of Interest Act when he failed to disclose his luxurious French villa. And we now have a finance minister who has breached multiple sections of the Conflict of Interest Act relating to his failure to recuse himself in the sum of hundreds of millions of dollars, nearly $1 billion of money that went to an organization that traveled him and his family around the world, promoted his daughter's book, and employed his daughter. And so it's time that the Minister of Finance do the only thing that is left to do, and that is resign as minister. Now, I've got to say that in the testimony of the finance minister yesterday, he claimed it was all a mistake. It was just, he had all the right intentions, but somehow he just didn't realize that $41,000 in travel, food, and accommodation expenses had gone unpaid for. And that if he had only known, he would have never allowed that to happen. Now, it's interesting that the finance minister would claim that. I mean, it's quite absurd. I mean, most Canadians would certainly know if they suddenly had received $41,000 in unpaid expenses. Indeed, it's more than many Canadians earn in an entire year. But the statement of we that was issued yesterday contradicts what the minister said, that it was all a misunderstanding, that it was all a mistake. Indeed, to sum up the statement of we, and I'm quoting from the statement that was issued from we, it states, quote, on a complementary basis, We Charity invites current and potential major funders. This has been a successful practice. After their trips, donors have provided tens of millions of dollars. Closed quote. So, there you have it. This was a free trip. We never provided Mr. Morneau with an invoice. Mr. Morneau never sought or inquired to have an invoice, to have those expenses paid, because it was just that. It was a free trip. And in return, we expected to get paid. And boy, did they get paid handsomely, to the tune of nearly $1 billion in hard-earned taxpayers' dollars. Now, my colleagues, MPs Poilievre, Barrett, and I wrote to the Ethics Commissioner a few weeks ago to call on the Ethics Commissioner to investigate Bill Morneau's failure to recuse himself with respect to awarding nearly $1 billion in taxpayers' money to we. And the Ethics Commissioner has launched an investigation, but in light of yesterday's shocking testimony from the minister, we're now calling on the Ethics Commissioner to undertake a further investigation. And with that, I will turn the floor over to my colleague, Michael Barrett.
Thanks very much. MP Cooper and MP Poilievre have joined me in writing to the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner for a second time concerning Finance Minister Bill Morneau. On the 16th of July, the Ethics Commissioner, Mr. Marion Dion, did confirm that he was investigating the Finance Minister for possible contraventions of the Act, Sections 6 and Sub 1 and Sub 21, and that a report would be released once complete. As Mr. Cooper indicated, we have again written to the Ethics Commissioner, this time with multiple sections for him to take a look at. And it's important that, based on the minister's testimony yesterday, that while some of these possible contraventions of the Act are related, they're not necessarily directly connected. And so we do have Section 11, which would prohibit Mr. Morneau and his family from accepting gifts or other advantages which might be seen to give him influence. We know that under Section 23, any of these gifts ought to have been disclosed. We know under Section 25 that there should be a declaration and there needs to be a recusal. Now, yesterday the minister said that he has recused himself in respect to other business on numerous occasions, but none of that has been recorded with the Ethics Commissioner. And what we've seen here is the continuation of a pattern with the Trudeau Liberals, that they feel like there's two sets of rules, one for the governing class and one for those that they govern. And in an act of extreme arrogance yesterday, the finance minister, knowing that he broke the law, waved his pen, wrote a check for $41,000 and said, well, sure, I broke the law, but here's a bunch of money, so sorry, and let's move on. You know, sorry works when my 5 and 7-year-old kids don't get along, and we ask them to, my wife and I ask them to apologize. That's appropriate. But when we have the Minister of Finance accepting illegal travel, when we have the Minister of Finance a repeat offender in breaking the Conflict of Interest Act, in accepting a trip worth more than what many Canadians earn as an annual salary, sorry doesn't cut it. And yesterday, Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition, Canada's Conservatives, called for the resignation of the Minister of Finance, and there are now on notice in multiple committees motions for committees to further call for the minister's resignation, and that will it was one put on notice by Mr. Cooper at the Finance Committee, and there's one on notice at the Ethics Committee, which is expected to be voted on later today. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Poilievre. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Si une famille restait à un hôtel et recevait 41 $ en service de chambre pour un repas et une bière, le lendemain, elle remarquerait si la charge n'était pas sur la facture. 41 $ serait remarquable pour une famille normale. Avec M. Morneau, il avoue avoir accepté 41 000 $, mais il essaie de nous faire croire qu'il n'a pas remarqué l'absence de facture. Qui avait-il pensé payer pour 41 000 $ de bénéfices de voyage, de luxe et d'autres bénéfices qu'il a reçus pendant ses vacances. Qui, pensait-il, avait payé pour le vin, pour les chambres, pour le transport, pour tous les autres bénéfices qu'il recevait pendant cette vacance extraordinaire? Comment est-ce que c'est même possible de dépenser 41 000 $ pour une vacance? Et en plus, de ne pas remarquer qu'il n'y avait pas de facture. Bill Morneau essaie de nous faire croire que soudainement, le jour même qu'il allait se témoigner devant un comité parlementaire qu'il a constaté que ces charges-là n'ont pas été payées. Personne croit cette version d'histoire. En fait, M. Morneau oublie toujours les bénéfices qu'il a reçus pour cette 41 000 $. Pourquoi ne veut-il pas nous dire qu'est-ce qu'il a reçu pour 41 000 $? Est-ce que c'était des bouteilles de vin extraordinaires, des chambres dans un palais? Qu'est-ce qu'il aurait pu recevoir pour ce montant d'argent? La raison pour laquelle il ne nous dit pas, c'est parce que l'instant que les Canadiens savent ce qu'il a reçu, les Canadiens vont aussi savoir que ça aurait été impossible d'oublier. Il y a au moins, comme mes collègues ont dit, il y a au moins 5 sections de la loi sur les conflits d'intérêts que M. Morneau a enfreint. Le titulaire de charges publiques est tenu de gérer ses affaires personnelles de manière à éviter de se trouver en situation de conflit d'intérêts. Section 5. Il est interdit à tout titulaire de charges publiques de prendre une décision ou de participer à la prise d'une décision dans l'exercice de sa charge s'il sait ou devrait vraisemblablement savoir que, en prenant cette décision, il pourrait se trouver en situation de conflit d'intérêts. Section 6. Cadeaux et autres avantages. Il est interdit à tout titulaire de charges publiques et à tout membre de sa famille d'accepter un cadeau et un autre avantage, y compris celui provenant d'une fiducie qui pourrait raisonnablement donner à penser qu'il a été donné pour influencer le titulaire dans l'exercice de ses fonctions. Section 11. Le titulaire de charges publiques doit se récuser concernant une discussion, une décision, un débat ou un vote à l'égard de toute question qui pourrait le placer en situation de conflit d'intérêts. Section 21. Et finalement, si la valeur totale de tous les cadeaux et d'autres avantages acceptés par le titulaire de charges publiques principales ou un membre de sa famille d'une même source autre que les parents et les amis du titulaire excède 200 $ sur une période de 12 mois, il incombe à ce dernier d'en faire état au commissaire dans le 30 jours suivant celui où la valeur des cadeaux et avantages excède ce montant, la section 23. 5 sections différentes que le ministre Morneau a enfreint dans un seul enjeu. En fait, l'organisme uni a publié hier des mots expliquant la situation très bien. Je vais juste le citer. L'UNI invite gratuitement d'importants bailleurs de fonds existants et potentiels. C'est une pratique efficace. Après les voyages, les donateurs donnent des dizaines de millions de dollars. Ça a bien fonctionné. Ils ont invité le grand argentier de notre pays, le ministre des Finances, dans une vacance. Des vacances visant à obtenir des dons de dizaines de millions de dollars. Et qu'est-ce qui est arrivé après? Le ministre Morneau s'est intervenu afin d'aider l'organisme à recevoir plus de 900 millions de dollars en contribution gouvernementale. Ce même ministre a annoncé une contribution à cet organisme dans le même mois où l'organisme a engagé sa fille. C'est quelque chose qui est aussi illégal. Alors, on se demande pourquoi Justin Trudeau ne le congédie pas. C'est ça la question. On sait que pendant la période les années Harper, il y avait une ministre qui avait besoin de démissionner parce qu'elle a dépensé 17 $ pour un jus d'orange. Alors, c'est clair, quand on enfreint 5 sections d'une loi, il faut se démissionner. Pourquoi est-ce que Bill Morneau n'est pas congédié par Justin Trudeau? Est-ce que c'est parce que Justin Trudeau a des secrets toujours en cet égard qu'il ne partage pas? On sait que en plus des frais de plus de 300 000 $ payés à sa femme, sa mère, son frère, qu'il y a aussi le transport et les dépenses personnelles que l'organisme aurait pu payer. Par exemple, on devrait savoir, et je me pose la question, est-ce que la femme de Justin Trudeau a recevoir des dépenses payées par l'organisme uni pour son apparence à Londres? Y a-t-il d'autres dépenses que la famille Trudeau a reçues de l'organisme uni? C'est une question juste. La famille a déjà reçu 300 000 $ en frais. Y a-t-il des dépenses aussi que la famille Trudeau s'est fait rembourser a reçu de l'organisme UI? Je pense que la raison pour laquelle Justin Trudeau n'a pas congédié son ministre des Finances hier, c'était parce que lui, il est dans la même situation. Et si il applique un standard d'éthique à son ministre des Finances, Justin Trudeau va devoir l'appliquer à lui-même et démissionner aussi. C'est la raison pour laquelle il permet son ministre de continuer. I will just conclude in English to summarize the very powerful and logical presentations of my two colleagues by saying this. We have identified at least 5 sections of the Ethics Act, 5, 6, 11, 21, and 23, that Bill Morneau has violated. He as much as admitted it yesterday. He admitted that he did not pay $41,000 in expenses for travel he did with this organization. $41,000 being about the average earnings of a middle-class Canadian. The average Canadian would notice if there was a $41 bill missing from their room service at a hotel. But Bill Morneau would have you believe that for an entire week he was showered with luxury, with benefits, with hospitality, and that he had no idea who was paying for it all. Bill Morneau intervened to give a grant to an organization the same month that organization had hired his daughter. Bill Morneau has already in the past been found guilty of violating the ethics law. So why hasn't Justin Trudeau fired him? I don't ask that rhetorically, but specifically. I think there's a reason. I think it's because if Justin Trudeau imposes any level of ethical standard on Bill Morneau, then others would ask that he impose it on himself. And there remain unanswered questions. In addition to the $300,000 of fees that we has paid to Justin Trudeau's family, are there other expenses that the Trudeau family have kept hidden? Are there similar secrets like the one Bill Morneau recently revealed about his family? Did the Trudeau family ever accept any expenses paid by the We organization? This is the question Justin Trudeau must answer today. Bill Morneau has been hiding this secret for years. What is Justin Trudeau hiding? Thank you. We now await your questions.
We will now take questions, starting with questions on the phone. Quick reminder, one question, one follow-up per reporter. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions, commençant par les questions au téléphone. Un petit rappel que c'est une question suivie par journaliste. Operator, do we have a first question?
Yes, thank you. Merci. Please press star one at this time. If you have a question, s'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. La première question est de Catherine Lévesque de la presse canadienne. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour messieurs. En fait, mes questions, vu qu'elles sont en français, sont dirigées à vous, Monsieur Poilievre. Je me demandais, est-ce que les conservateurs, sachant ce que vous savez maintenant avec M. Morneau, sont prêts à faire tomber le gouvernement? Et si oui, quand?
Nous proposons d'utiliser les moyens parlementaires pour tenir responsable le gouvernement. C'est ça notre intention. Les Canadiens nous ont donné un mandat augmenté pendant des élections, une plus grande voix et des plus grands nombres à la Chambre des communes. Ils ont réduit le gouvernement Trudeau en un gouvernement minoritaire. Donc, nous allons utiliser cette influence et ces pouvoirs pour collaborer avec les autres partis de l'opposition afin de forcer une imputabilité sur le gouvernement Trudeau. À part de ça, je pense que c'est à Justin Trudeau et Bill Morneau à prendre la responsabilité pour ce qu'ils ont fait. Merci.
Je pose la question parce que votre collègue Anne Reyes a dit que les conservateurs étaient prêts à faire tomber le gouvernement dès le mois d'août. Or, vous allez avoir un nouveau chef à ce moment-là. Donc, je me demandais, je vous redemande la question, est-ce que c'est votre intention de faire tomber le gouvernement? Si oui, est-ce que c'est au mois d'août que vous comptez le faire?
Et comme je viens de vous dire, nous allons utiliser les moyens dans le Parlement pour tenir responsable le gouvernement Trudeau. Je pense que Trudeau et Morneau se sont montrés corrompus en recevant des bénéfices d'un organisme, des centaines de milliers de dollars, et au retour, ont essayé de verser un contrat de 912 millions de dollars à cet organisme. Le rôle de l'opposition, c'est de forcer une imputabilité sur ces mêmes ministres pour leur conduite illégale, et nous allons faire ça. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Justin Trudeau was reduced to a minority, had the worst election result of any returning prime minister in Canadian history. The Canadians gave us an increased mandate with more MPs and gave the opposition a majority with which to hold the government to account. We are going to use the tools of Parliament to hold Justin Trudeau and Bill Morneau accountable for this avalanche of illegal activity. Both Trudeau and Morneau are law-breaking machines. And our job as official opposition will be to expose their corruption and hold them accountable. Thank you.
Operator, next question.
Thank you. The next question is from Brian Lilly, Toronto Sun. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Yesterday, Minister Morneau, while saying that he had made a mistake in not recusing himself and not paying for the travel earlier, also tried to say that really the awarding of this contract, not to We Charity, but to We Charity Foundation, was the responsibility of Minister Bardish Chagger. This is a minister without a department, so perhaps, Pierre, you're the best to answer it given your cabinet experience. Could you ever have put through a $912 million project by yourself without the support of the finance minister and the full knowledge and backing of the finance minister when you were in cabinet?
I feel badly for Minister Chagger. I think it's disgusting the way she's being treated. The fact that these men would blame her for their conduct. She is a junior minister who reports to the Heritage Department. This is an expenditure by the Employment Department, approved under authorities granted to the Minister of Finance and directed out of the PMO. The men responsible for this are Bill Morneau and Justin Trudeau. They accepted thousands of dollars of free gifts from this organization. They directed a $912 million nonsensical contribution to this organization. And for them to try and blame a junior minister who had no authority to do any of this is absolutely disgusting, and it symbolizes everything that is wrong with the rot at the head of this government.
On the issue of who they signed the contract with, in my reporting on WE's inner workings, on my reporting on their vast real estate holdings, you keep seeing the same thing, new companies, new charities, foundations, different names. Were you surprised that it was the We Charity Foundation, and what issues do any of you have? I'll let any of the three of you answer on this. What issues do you see in the government awarding a $912 million contract to an organization with no public financials available and no record of delivering any type of program?
I'll respond very quickly. Let's summarize. Justin Trudeau and Bill Morneau intervened to give a $912 million non-competitive contribution to the Real Estate Holding Foundation of a group that had paid Trudeau's family over $300,000, had hired the Minister of Finance's daughter, and had paid over $41,000 in illegal expenses for the finance minister's vacations. That's just what we know so far. Anyone else want to add anything?
Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. The next question is from Tom Korski, Blacklock's reporter. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Two short questions. One for Mr. Barrett as a member of the Ethics Committee, which voted last night, as you know, to compel the Prime Minister to appear for questioning, but more interestingly, seeks surrender of all records of all speaking fees paid by anybody to the members of the Trudeau family since 2008. When you get those records, Mr. Barrett, and you look on the one hand of the list of speaking fees, and on the other hand of votes in the House or dealings with federal contractors, what, if anything, do you expect to find?
Well, what we've learned over the last number of weeks is that the Prime Minister's family received more than $300,000 from an organization that has received multiple non-tendered contracts from the government, including some reported by your outlet, for which the PCO offers no explanation. And we know that that same organization did give the finance minister, employs his daughter. We know that they gave him nearly $41,000 in an illegal vacation, undeclared by him, and that then that same company was the recipient of a $912 million untendered contract, which came at a very good time for that organization, who was in some financial need and would have benefited more than $43 million for administering that program, a program that the Federal Public Service already essentially administers in the Canada Summer Jobs program. When we take a look at the connection between the Prime Minister and this organization, that connection is through his family. So it's important that in the context of ensuring transparency and accountability for all public office holders, that we ensure that recusals are made where appropriate and that disclosures are made where appropriate. That has not been the practice of this Prime Minister and this Finance Minister. So we'll take a look at those documents and see if there are other areas where disclosures ought to have been made. And if necessary, we'll refer those matters to the appropriate authorities, be it the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner or the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Thank you.
And Mr. Poilievre, I wanted to ask you about the Conflict of Interest Act. The Commissioner of Ethics has said for years that naming and shaming and a maximum $500 penalty is inadequate. The Conservative Party in 2019 proposed $20,000 fines, although it's not obvious what impact that would make in the instance, for instance, of the Minister of Finance. Can I ask you, are there more direct democratic sanctions that you would advocate as penalties for breach of the Act, such as having to face electors in a special by-election?
It's an interesting idea. Thank you for sharing it. I haven't considered that one. But what I would say is this. We have written the RCMP. We believe that there are sections of the criminal code in play when it comes to providing government officials with significant financial benefit and then asking those same government officials for favorable decisions. And we asked the Prime Minister not to interfere with our national police force. He did so in the Mark Norman case. He decided he didn't like an admiral and directed the police to charge him, had to drop those charges and pay out a settlement as a result. He did so in SNC-Lavalin, where he tried to interfere to protect a Liberal Link company from being prosecuted. And he also implicated the RCMP in his legal trip to Billionaire Island. We're asking the Prime Minister to stay away from the RCMP on this file and let the police make their own decision as to whether or not the criminal code applies to the conduct of ministers in this case.
We'll now take questions from the room. Nous allons prendre des questions dans la salle.
Bonjour, M. Poilievre, Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. Est-ce que cet enjeu-là, d'après vous, est assez sérieux pour justifier une élection, pour que les Canadiens puissent s'exprimer sur cet enjeu-là?
J'ai déjà répondu à cette question. Les Canadiens et Canadiens vont devoir décider à un moment donné si ils accepteront le fait que Justin Trudeau et sa famille aient reçu 300 000 $ d'un organisme auquel il a essayé de verser 900 millions de dollars. Les Canadiens, à un moment donné, dans le futur, je ne sais pas quand, décideront si ils acceptent qu'un ministre des Finances reçoit une vacance de 41 000 $ d'un organisme un jour et l'autre jour essaie de donner près d'1 milliard de dollars à cet organisme. Donc, enfin, que ce soit dans le futur proche ou loin, les Canadiens décideront.
J'aimerais, par ailleurs, est-ce que vous pensez que, comme l'a suggéré M. Blanchette du Bloc québécois, que M. Trudeau devrait se retirer de ses fonctions, le temps de faire la lumière sur cette affaire-là, parce qu'il dit essentiellement c'est devenu une forme de distraction, tout ça, alors qu'on est en crise sanitaire, puis il faut gérer tout ça. Est-ce que vous êtes d'accord avec lui?
Premièrement, je fais appel à Justin Trudeau à révéler toutes les dépenses que l'organisme uni a payées pour sa famille. Hier, Bill Morneau nous a dit avoir reçu plus de 41 milliards de $1000 en vacances qu'il a soudainement constaté. On veut savoir si la famille Trudeau a reçu aussi d'autres dépenses, en plus des frais de 300 000 $. I'd like to say that in English. We need from Trudeau is to tell us if his family received any other expenses covered by the WE organization or its affiliates. Bill Morneau realized suddenly, had an epiphany the day he was testifying, that there were all these expenses that he had enjoyed from WE during his vacation. Is Justin Trudeau hiding anything in that regard? We should ask him that. on va décider en équipe si c'est la position du Parti conservateur.
Good morning, Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News. I'm wondering if you can be very clear about the parliamentary tools you're considering going forward, not only to expose what else is going on here with the we situation, but also to see consequences.
Well, I've already called Justin Trudeau to testify at the Finance Committee, which he has reluctantly accepted. We will question him under oath. We will require that he read an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We will use the Ethics Committee under the able leadership of our Shadow Minister of Ethics, Michael Barrett, to extract documents that will shed more light on this scandal. And we will continue to urge the resumption of full Parliament so that we can daily question the government on these revelations. Do you want add anything to that? Shadow Minister?
Just briefly, that the Ethics Committee has also passed a motion yesterday calling for the Prime Minister to appear. We'll consider further motions today as well. But the study that's going to move forward at the Ethics Committee will include calling further witnesses. And so with government operations, with the Ethics Committee, with Finance, all reviewing this and studying this matter, with the matter being referred to the RCMP, but also officers of Parliament, including the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner and the Procurement Ombudsman, reviewing this issue. The situation evolves daily, and at this point, we seem to be at the very beginning, or just at the tip of the iceberg.
I'd like to bring up another controversy, this one involving Rita Hall. I'm wondering if all three of you can comment on what you think of Justin Trudeau's appointment of Julie Payette now that she's facing harassment and bullying allegations from staff, and what you think needs to happen. Specifically, would you be in favor of seeing an investigation or even for Trudeau to appoint a new Governor General?
All Canadians are entitled to a safe workplace free from harassment and violence, and there needs to be mechanisms in place that allow for employees who feel that they've been subjected to inappropriate treatment to be able to have their claims investigated. And so, if there is not currently a mechanism in place outside of the person with whom the allegations are being made against, for staff members to raise that complaint, then that's something that needs to be examined. This is another reason. This is another example of what happens when Canada's Parliament is shuttered. Parliamentarians can't undertake the work of commissioning changes or examining what options need to be undertaken. And so the appointment of the Governor General is done on the advice of the Prime Minister by Her Majesty the Queen, and the Governor General, Her Excellency, does deserve due process in the investigation of these complaints, and so we'll have to see that process unfold.
Mackenzie?
Hi, Mackenzie Gray, CTV News. My questions are for Mr. Poilievre. During your remarks, you seem to equate that the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister are on the same ethical plane with the conduct that they've had during this issue. You've called for the Finance Minister to resign, so does that also mean you think the Prime Minister should resign as well?
I certainly wouldn't object to it. It's astonishing that members of the Prime Minister's immediate family would receive $300,000 plus payments allegedly for speaking, and then that the Prime Minister would think it acceptable to turn around and give the group that paid his family a $900 million contribution, that he would not only be involved in the cabinet decision, but in the very development of the contribution itself. It is an appalling lack of ethics and moral bankruptcy that we see in this Prime Minister. And he hasn't even come clean yet. I asked in the House of Commons the other day how many expenses his family had covered by the We charity. And he refused to stand up and answer that question. So does Justin Trudeau have a $41,000 surprise that he is keeping hidden throughout this process? Somebody needs to ask him that. He should come clean now instead of holding on to this secret the way Bill Morneau did.
To go back to Olivia's question about what you're actually able to do to get the finance minister to resign, your party called on him in 2017 to resign. Obviously, he's still the finance minister. One of the clearest options, I think, in your toolbox that I can see is trying to hold up government legislation right now. Obviously, your party has had to give unanimous consent to bring these things forward. Is that something that you're willing to do to try to get the finance minister to resign or to get any other outcome that you're looking for?
Shadow Minister Cooper has raised a motion in the Finance Committee, and I'll let him comment on his motion for the minister's resignation.
After hearing the testimony of the finance minister in which he admitted to breaching multiple sections of the Conflict of Interest Act, after he admitted to being a repeat offender yesterday, I brought forward a motion before the committee to call on the minister to resign. So that motion has been put on notice. It will be debated before the Finance Committee, and I expect that it will pass the committee. And I believe that although that is not a binding vote on the minister, it sends a powerful signal that the minister has lost the confidence of all committees, the Finance Committee, to continue on as Minister of Finance. And so it underscores the fact that it shouldn't even have to come to that. The minister should simply do the right thing, do the honorable thing, and resign now.
We'll now go back to the phone. Operator, next question.
Yes, and we have a question. Notre prochaine question est de Anne-Caroline Desplanques, le Journal de Montréal. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour monsieur. M'entendez-vous?
Oui.
Oui, ma question est relative au contrat qui a été accordé. Vous avez fait mention de ce contrat accordé l'année dernière, le même mois où une des filles de M. Morneau a eu un emploi chez We Charity. C'est un autre contrat millionnaire. Avez-vous des informations relatives à ce contrat-là? Qu'est-ce qui a été accompli depuis un an avec les 3 millions offerts par le gouvernement?
Ça, c'est une bonne question. Je dois avouer ne pas avoir eu l'occasion d'étudier des résultats de ces dépenses, mais hier, j'ai eu l'occasion de poser la question au ministre s'il savait qu'il brisait la loi en accordant une annonce de 3 millions de dollars pour un organisme qui a, dans le même mois, engagé sa fille. C'était un autre conflit d'intérêts évident et énorme qui viole la loi sur les conflits d'intérêts. M. Morneau n'a pas répondu à ma question, mais je pense qu'il nous faut regarder des résultats pour savoir ce que les Canadiens ont reçu pour ces 3 millions de dollars. Merci.
En suivi, par rapport au voyage d'hier, les chiffres qu'on fournit, oui, me semble, enfin, c'est un peu dur de faire le calcul. Là, il parle de 4 395 $ par personne pour ces 2 voyages. Et en calculant le nombre de personnes impliquées, on n'arrive pas aux 41 000 $. Qu'est-ce qu'on doit comprendre? Est-ce qu'il y a des choses qu'on ne sait pas encore, à votre avis, relativement à ces voyages et aux frais qui ont été encourus?
Mais qu'est-ce que le 41 000 $ a acheté? On ne sait pas. Il a dit que c'était pour des programmes. C'est quoi un programme sur une vacance? Est-ce que c'est un programme de goûter du vin? Est-ce que c'était un programme d'aller sur un hélicoptère? Est-ce que c'était un programme d'aller sur la plage ou quoi? C'est quoi c'est quoi le bénéfice acheté pour 41 000 que le ministre des Finances n'avait pas remarqué pour presque 2 ans? Alors, je pense que quelqu'un devrait poser la question au ministre Morneau, qu'est-ce qu'il a reçu pour 41 000 en cadeau de cet organisme?
Opérateur, prochaine question.
Ceci était la dernière question.
Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.